What is up, everybody? Hard to believe, but we've got another month, and we are going to be doing the February 24 Top Ops Dissected. So also on the docket for you all, in a couple weeks, I am doing the S&P Capital Summit. So I am going to be preparing a presentation on easy money trades that I plan on sharing with you all. So that should be coming up in a couple weeks. And I also shared that huge, big SMCI video, which is, in my opinion, a must watch. Those two will keep you all occupied, and for now, let's dive into this. As I tweeted, this was another super active month in a year that has already been pretty fireworks. Even March so far, like we had NVIDIA going on last week, that was very similar to the SMCI setup, especially it occurring on a Friday with some of the zero DTE stuff. So study. It is so important to make hay while the sun is shining. Who knows how long these opportunities will last? For all we know, the next couple weeks could be total duds. I do think with NVIDIA cracking, it's possible we get a big picture top in the semis. So who knows? I mean, there's definitely some meat on the bone for some of these to collapse further. At least at the time of recording this, I know it takes a while to get these produced, but I'm curious what's going to happen on the ARM lockup. I'm curious what's going to happen now with NVIDIA putting in a top. Nevertheless, we will see by the time this actually gets released. And so first, let's dive into USO. This was on February 1st. And so what we had was essentially a headline, I believe coming from Al Jazeera, that there were rumors of a ceasefire. Obviously, with war in the Middle East, that has added some geopolitical premium to the price of USO, which is just the ETF that tracks oil. So when that headline comes out, this is one of those kind of more under the radar sources that you either want to be following on Twitter or doing some type of scraping, website scraping that is. Headline comes out, you want to short. Now keep in mind, when you go for USO, there's also many ways to make this trade. You know, you could go into short XOP, which is the basket of producers. I believe even gold moved on this. So there's a lot of different ways you can play some of the geopolitical macro risk. Short USO, of course, is the most obvious one. So it's going to keep on being the same basics, where you essentially can do your short as soon as you see the headline, then do the trailing bar highs as the trailing stop, and that actually allows you to really catch the bulk of this move. As I've stressed before, guys, it is a lot of in-play stuff where simple system equals strong, powerful results. We don't need to overcomplicate it. We do not need to be an oil analyst or a geopolitical analyst. Obviously, this headline ended up not being true. That's kind of the nature of the game, but keep in mind that there's such huge benefit when you act first. When you act first, worst case, this headline just doesn't move. Or in many cases, even if the headline isn't that great, if you're first, people will still be piling in after you. And so it kind of gives you a free roll on potentially making money if the headline's legit. So that's something to think about. You know, it's better to act fast and precise and trust your gut once you've built up this skill set than it is to hesitate and play analyst. Next, we've got MOR. So this is a biotech. So this stock could run up a little bit, but then it gets a headline, NVS Novartis in talks to buy it. So obviously in these types of M&A headlines, you generally get a bot that spikes it up, but then there was some meat on the bone, especially because this one had been run up as well on the daily chart. This was a little bit slower to move. I think, again, like you can really logic your way out of a lot of these headlines. Oh my God, the stock's been up a little bit. This really isn't so different than the CYTK, I would argue, that we saw over the last couple months, in which, like, yes, you can overly logic or you can kind of just trust your system. This had no prior actual formal headlines from Novartis that I was aware of, nothing in my notes. The system of holding until prior bar lows actually worked very, very well again. In fact, you barely got stopped out at around like 1440-ish on what otherwise would have caught you a couple extra bucks. But that's fine. You know, sometimes that'll happen. The point isn't to catch the whole leg every time. The point is just to find a system of stops that in the aggregate works very, very well. Again, I don't need us to be M&A analysts. I don't need us to be biotech analysts. Nevertheless, the simple system works way more than logicking everything. And I think that alone is a really big lesson, especially as we've done these for quite some time now. NVTA, the beloved child, well, not really child, but the beloved stock of Mrs. I assume she's married, but that all seems silly. Anyways, of good old Cathie Woods. She had owned this stock for a while, but you know, sadly, the future of growth growth and whatever crazy modeling she did has not come to fruition. I don't think they included the modeling of bankruptcy. Okay, I'm done flexing on her. Nevertheless, headline comes out, preparing for bankruptcy. So this is another headline where I think people use their head too much. Oh my God, it's at 40 cents. It's already, already people expect to be bankrupt. But no. We don't need to use like our heads too much. Never before was there any headline that this stock was bankrupt. Yes, it's trading like dog shit, but at least market cap wise, this stock actually still had a lot of meat on the bone. And again, it's super liquid. Like, what are you really going to risk if this, like, it either doesn't move, it's not going to go really, not that it can't go, but like, even if it goes up, you take your loss. If it goes above the unaffected price, you just take your loss. Not a big deal. Nevertheless, trailing bar highs works really, really well. And you end up catching a massive leg, especially as a percentile. It's just kind of like a textbook easy play. This is no different than some of those offering headlines we've seen again and again. Nothing crazy here. I think these are the trades where if you've been following along and trying to replicate these are the type of things where like, it's really not that risky to start to size up on this. Like if you're a trader that makes a couple $100, I don't think it's really a couple $100 in a trade, that is. I don't think it's so crazy to get a couple thousand shares of this. It's doing pretty large volume during this. So once you get enough reps in, that's when you want to really be comfortably, prudently, safely pushing your sizing. Because as we've seen, a lot of these are very, very replicable. Speaking of replicable, BRTX on February 6, 2024. This was an offering. And so this was a stock, again, low float kind of piece of crap that had been running up. Pre-market, if you're in your seat early, there's some opportunity. So for those that are using NewsEdge or Newsware or whatever to kind of filter out for the press releases, if you can be focused in early pre-market, this is kind of just the same type of offering thing we've done. Again, prior bar highs works very, very well. Just look, I'm not saying these are home runs by any means. And I hope you guys appreciate that every time when I do these monthly reviews, I'm trying to include a mix of home runs, and I'm trying to include a mix of just the easy money trades, the really nice layups that you can start to build a cushion and base with. Stuff like NVTA, stuff like this BRTX. Really, it's been probably 6 or 7 months now where every month we've seen some type of easy offering, and it just really holds prior bar highs pretty well. Okay. Now, here was an interesting one. Bravo Mike Romeo, Beamer, they had a headline that they teamed up with NVIDIA for doing some, video crap. So Beamer is another kind of smaller microcap stock. The headline, admittedly, is kind of bullshitty for sure, like especially when you read the full press release. Nevertheless, we are in the hottest semiconductor market probably since the dot-com bubble. In no way am I saying this is necessarily a bubble at all, but this is definitely the hottest semi-market we've seen. You do not want to get in front of this early. Whether you think it's dumb or not, it is not your job to play analyst. It is your job to listen to the chart. And what this chart tells you is you want to be with the trend for a huge bulk of the morning, right? So even off the open, we get a pretty flat consolidation. We break to highs. Prior bar lows does kind of stop you out a little premature. Again, that's totally fine. Now, what I think is interesting to point out is that I think that second breakout, a little bit before 11 a.m., I actually think that's a really good setup. Overall, the consolidation held the moving average. It was a good amount of time. We kind of have moved enough to suck a bunch of shorts in. We go to break out and we kind of fail there. No harm, no foul. When you get back below the level, you can kind of take that loss. And so sure enough, it does end up going shortly thereafter, and it beautifully holds prior bar lows. I don't love the setup though, as far as buying back on that break. Like if I were to buy back on that break at around, I don't know, just under 20 bucks or so, yes, it ended up going super cleanly, but I don't particularly love that setup anyways. So I probably would have had way less size and pretty minimal size if I played that at all. Sometimes, look, it's a game of probability. Sometimes that happens. I do think that once that stock then goes parabolic. The short is interesting once we break prior bar lows, but again, I don't particularly super love it. Like, we didn't have major price capitulation, nor did we have volume capitulation. So again, the short after that kind of pretty euphoric pop to 35, it's good. I don't think it's great though. I think probably some of the easier money was thinking long in this, just because again, anytime you get a PR in a lower micro cap, lower float stock on the biggest theme in the market these days, I really want to think, how can I go with it if it sets up properly? So yeah, I think that's important to touch on. The next stock I'm going to discuss is Lunar, LUNR. And so first I wanted to show you all the daily. So what we see is it makes an initial leg to $7 around February 12th. We pull back our 2 days. We then break prior bar highs on the daily and break out above 7. And then we are off to the races. And so kind of what came up on the SMCI when I was talking about exhaustion gaps and everything else, I really love to see a breakout. I love to see day 1, day 2, kind of like a day 1 breakout, day 2 continuation, then day 3 exhaustion gap. And that is exactly what we ended up getting here. And so now that we have this big picture in mind, let's jump onto the intraday chart. And so this is going to be on February 21st. As far as the short, again, this is one of those things where I think it's okay. I don't necessarily like super love it anywhere. I think it's totally fair to go for this initial short below 1150. I think it's totally fair to then get stopped out. I also think it's totally fair to then go for the short again. Then once we capitulate like that, that's such a big move so fast. I also think the long is totally fair as well once we reference back above the halt price. So call that a price of around like 870-ish. I'm kind of just eyeballing it. I think that's a totally valid place to cover the short into the capitulation, then flip long using break of prior bar lows as the stop. And the funny part too is I actually think this long might even be better than the short, because again, I mean, I kind of think the setups off the open are maybe a B. The daily, of course, is really appealing, but on the intraday chart alone, I think it's probably just a B. It wasn't so tight or long of a consolidation. But then once we melt almost 4 points in a straight line, 3.5 points or something like that, that is pretty tempting for the long, especially when you get that mega volume capitulation. So that's kind of what I thought of Lunar, LUNR. Then, by the way, the rest of the stuff, I think it's so important to recognize the rest of the day pretty much as no man's land. So I'm not really playing anything in that mid-range. If I want to short this again, there's always exceptions to the rules, but for the most part, I want this to roll to lows and break the $8 level for me to really have conviction that we could do a leg lower. So also in here, by the way, which I skipped over, is SMCI. So I'm not going to touch SMCI just because I did that massive, huge 3-hour-long video that I shared. If there's any questions on the SMCI, please follow up with me on that. But again, when there's a 3-hour-long video out there and you guys can just go and watch it on 2x, no point in me just overly beating that up. One thing I did want to touch finally is the PDD, Pindodo. This happened on February 23rd, 24. What it was that lawmakers demanded a Temu ban. First, with any headline, we always want to ask, where did this headline come out? The case of this headline, this came out from The Information. The Information is another great resource where sometimes they break market-moving news, somewhat under the radar. Bloomberg is, of course, a great news source that does filter the stuff out for you. Otherwise, web scrapers, whatever else. What I really want to point out about this, so by the way, like Temu is owned by Pindodo, by the way, so you kind of need some different types of knowledge and everything else. But the other thing I want to point out most of all is in SMCI and even with NVIDIA, we've started to talk about those 0 DTE options. This happened on a Friday. So even if you don't know how big of a deal this headline is, once you see that volume come in and this start to work, I think it's totally worthwhile to gain experience and start to explore how to properly trade 0 DTE options on plays like this, just because when these plays go, it can be so asymmetric. If you're able to get into some of those options before this is moved, the reward you can make on this, even on 5K, 10K premium, is just so massive because the premiums explode when there's only a few hours left left until expiry. For people that are interested in this stuff, how do you then delve that out further? I really recommend you start in Evernote and you just build a notebook, and it might be Friday 0 DTEs, and then you just start to document all of these setups. There's probably already been a couple that I've discussed on this video. Obviously SMCI, obviously NVIDIA, obviously PDD. There used to be also that Microsoft AI headline. There was like the Sam Altman AI headline. Like there's definitely been a lot of headlines in probably the last 6 months or so that have moved big on Fridays. Those zero DTEs are just so attractive. So I would just be building up a whole playbook and starting to really study when to apply these, what strikes to go for, how much sizing. It's a really powerful tool to have in your repertoire. So that kind of sums up this month's, what I thought were the top ops. But again, I can't stress enough, like SMCI is probably the lone A++++. Like all of these other ops were kind of good, but SMCI was in a league of its own. I think SMCI was probably, probably the best op in the last 2 or 3 years. Certainly better than anything last year, certainly anything better than 2022. So much of your time, if it's in your playbook or if you want to expand into that play, you really need to just obsessively study that. Go through that daily chart and look at what it did intraday on all the days over that move. What were the signs? What were the tells? What was the volume? What was the price action like? When it did crack, what made that day different than the others? What was the best way to capture it? What makes sense for you and your playbook? I can't stress enough, I did not think we were going to see another opportunity like that so soon, like we saw in NVIDIA. Who knows when the next one will be, but it's better to be prepared faster and keep that in the back of your pocket than to be underprepared should another one happen in a couple weeks from now or even next week. So please, 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 it's so important to study this stuff super hard. Do not put this stuff like, oh, I'm gonna learn this big op in next week or next month. You really want to learn as quick as possible and internalize it, because the market waits for no man. Certainly it does not wait for me or anyone else that I know. So thank you all, continually just trying to get some of this good content out. Any questions, any comments, please let me know. And, appreciate the support and everything else.